Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. This is part C of MK Ultra Part 4, Traveling into the Distance. I've had to divide this lecture into 3 parts, A, B, and C, so that I could effectively produce this particular lecture in 3 substantive parts. And ladies and gentlemen, this final part of part 4 will follow the same format as the previous 2 lectures on this topic. I'm going to be reading from a collection of memorandums between, for the most part, the Assistant Deputy Director of Plans for the CIA and the CIA Director himself concerning MK Ultra. Some of these memorandums have redacted or undefined recipients and senders, but we'll read them anyhow, seeing as how they are official CIA documents that were declassified for public consumption. So we're going to continue reading from the memorandums. We're going to read page 84, and we're going to continue on to page 91. Then we're going to talk again briefly about MK Naomi, which was a chemical and biological weapons project. And then we will close the lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Page 84 reads, beginning at the top, the destruction was based on a waiver of internal CIA regulations, CSI 70-10, which regulated the retirement of inactive records. As Tama Karamessinas, the Deputy Director of Plans, wrote in the regulation, retirement is not a matter of convenience or of storage, but of conscious judgment in the application of the rules modified by knowledge of individual component needs. The heart of this judgment is to ensure that the complete story can be reconstructed in later years and by people who may be unfamiliar with the events. The destruction of MK Ultra documents made it impossible for the Select Committee, that's the Senate Select Committee, to determine the full range and extent of the largest CIA research program involving chemical and biological agents. The destruction also prevented the CIA from locating and providing medical assistance to the individuals who were subjects in the program. Finally, it prevented the committee from determining the full extent of the operations, which made use of materials developed in the MK Ultra program. From the inception of MK Ultra, normal agency procedures were waived. In 1953, Mr. Helms, then the Assistant Deputy Director for Plans, proposed the establishment of MK Ultra. Under the proposal, 6% of research and development and the development budget of TSD would be expended without the establishment of formal contractual relations, because contracts would reveal government interest. Helms also voted that qualified individuals in the field are most reluctant to enter into signed agreements of any sort, which connect them with this activity since such a connection would jeopardize their professional reputations. Other agency procedures, for example, the forwarding of documents in support of invoices and the provision for regular audit procedures, were also waived. On April 14, 1953, then the Director of Central Intelligence, Alan Dulles, approved MK Ultra noting that security considerations precluded handling the project through usual contractual agreements. So I'm going to stop there before I continue. So we pick up on page 84, continuing what page 83 revealed, and that is that the chief doctor of MK Ultra, Dr. Sidney Godaleb, he's retiring. And this is around 1973 here. The director of Central Intelligence was contacted by Dr. Godaleb, and Dr. Godaleb said, I'm retiring from the CIA, and by proxy, I'll be retiring from Project MK Ultra. Here is a box of documents, or rather boxes of documents that I've compiled over the past 20 years that reveal the inner workings of Project MK Ultra. I think they should be destroyed in the interest of the CIA and in the interest of this program, this project. And Dr. Godaleb successfully destroyed boxes and boxes of CIA documents in this same manner. He would go to the DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence, and tell him, I believe that these documents ought to be destroyed. And the Director of Central Intelligence would do an examination of the reasoning behind the destruction of the MK Ultra documents. And he would have them destroyed, probably incinerated. But this gives the reader some semblance as to how this mechanism came into play. The Director of Central Intelligence was approached by an employee or a official in the MK Ultra project. He'd come to him at some point, probably in a closed door meeting, and say, I have some documents I think need to be destroyed. I think these documents are better left outside of the public knowledge. And here are the documents here. At that point, the Director of Central Intelligence would gather a committee of persons and decide if these documents should be destroyed or not. If they believe they should be destroyed, then they're promptly incinerated. If they do not believe the documents need to be destroyed, then they're kept on record as confidential until they are declassified. Now, Sidney Godaleb has asked the Director of Central Intelligence to destroy documents related to his experimentations on people. And this document this destruction of documents is it's contingent on a waiver of internal CIA regulations, which regulated the retirement of inactive records. Now, here's why that's important. It's important because these documents being destroyed is something that the Director of Central Intelligence wants to pass off as the retirement of inactive records. They're not documenting, the CIA is not documenting these matters as Dr. Sidney Godaleb approached the Director of Central Intelligence. Dr. Godelib asked the Central Intelligence to destroy documents. The Director of Central Intelligence either complied or did not comply. So, what they're trying to do is bypass such a thing. They're putting together these documents that are called CSI 70-10s, which allow the retirement of inactive records. So that's how they're going to designate the destruction of these documents. They're going to designate it, they're going to document it as the retirement of inactive records, you see. But ultimately, the real reason that these documents are being destroyed is that, quite frankly, the American public would be outraged if it knew that the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and the Departments of Defense were collaborating in human experiments involving unwitting men, women, and children. I, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, have seen these matters escalate as far north as you could possibly imagine, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? These projects are being investigated by the U.S. Senate. Ladies and gentlemen. And the U.S. Senate sees unconstitutional activity happening. All right. Later directors of the CIA that looked back on MK Ultra and saw how it was run said publicly in newspapers and in Senate hearings, these projects are unconstitutional and they violate the civil rights of people. All right, the CIA's director himself, Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the director of the CIA as these matters first started hitting the ears of the U.S. Senate, said that projects and experiments like the one that the CIA named Operation Midnight Climax, where CIA-sponsored prostitutes were taking Tricks and Johns into hotel rooms and giving them LSD, and there'd be two CIA agents standing behind the mirror in the room, looking into the room through a plexiglass mirror at this prostitute, this CIA-sponsored prostitute, and this trick she picked up. And they would be watching the encounter, even the sexual moments, to see what the effects of the LSD would be on the guy soliciting the prostitute. All right, and the prostitute didn't know that they were being watched. Neither did the trick. But their actions were being watched by CIA agents. What could they have possibly been documenting? I don't know. Perhaps human sexual behavior while on LSD. But Admiral Stansfield Turner said he thought that experiment was disgusting. The CIA ran a lot of questionable programs in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. One of the programs in the 1960s required the foreskins of male children aged 5 to 7 to see what an early childhood circumcision would do to these young boys' psyche. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean the imaginative nature of these experiments is mind-boggling. All right. And really, there was no limit to the kinds of things that a person could become subjected to during this experiment. And essentially, they're determining whether or not documents should be destroyed because of this. So we're going to move on to page 85. And I'll start at the top. The DCI Alan Dulles, ladies and gentlemen, approved MK Ultra. Okay, whether or not he knew the extent of the human behavior and experimentation that this program would explore is a matter of debate. It's a matter of debate. Some think he knew more than he let on. Some people think he knows less than he let on. Me personally, I think he knew less than he was let on. I think he was used as a puppet by the employees of the CIA who wanted to engage in Project MK Ultra. I think that he was used as a tool by the orchestrators of Project MK Ultra. I think they told him very little about what they were really after and about what they really wanted to do. And I think that this director of the CIA was poorly briefed, intentionally poorly briefed on the matter, so that he doesn't appear incompetent, but also not too much in the know, because quite frankly, if he knew everything that was about to happen, everything that was about to take place, he probably wouldn't have approved it. So you have to keep the director in the dark. Don't tell him everything we're about to do in this project. Tell him just enough to where he sees it to be a feasible project. And then keep him in the dark about the rest of the procedural elements of this program, this project. So that was the general gist of how the director of the CIA was calculated. Keep him in the dark. Don't tell him too much, but he trusts us. All right, the director of the CIA trusts us. Okay, us in the TSA, us in the medical wing, us in the espionage wing, us in the covert operations wing of the CIA. The director trusts us. Just give him the basics and let him sign off on it. We'll take the rest into our own hands. So there were investigations by MK Ultra, by the Inspector General and the audit staff of the substantial deficiencies and resulted from the waivers. And mind you, I'm going to stop there. These waivers were the waivers that destroyed documents needed to go through a process. These waivers allowed documents to be destroyed without a formal process. So because TSD had not reserved the right to audit the books of contractors in MK Ultra, the CIA had been unable to verify the use of agency grants by a contractor. Another firm had failed to establish controls and safeguards which would assure proper accountability in use of government funds, with the result that funds have been used for purposes not contemplated by grants or allowable under usual contracted relationships. The entire MK Ultra arrangement was condemned for having administrative lines which were unclear, overly permissive, and irresponsibly supervised. The head of the audit branch noted that the inspections and audits led us to see MK Ultra as frequently having provided a device to escape normal administrative controls for research that is not especially sensitive, as having allowed practices that produce gross administrative failures as having permitted the establishment of the special relationship with unreliable organizations on an unacceptable basis, and as having produced on at least one occasion a cavalier treatment of a bona fide contractual organization. While admitting that there may be need for special mechanisms for handling sensitive projects, the chief of the audit branch wrote that both of the terms of the reference and the ground rules for handling such special projects should be spelled out in advance so that diversion from normal channels does not mean the abandonment of controls. Special procedures may be necessary to ensure the security of highly sensitive operations, to prevent the erosion of normal internal control mechanisms like waivers, and should not be extended to less sensitive operations. Moreover, only those regulations which would endanger security would be waived. To waive regulations generally would result in highly sensitive and controversial projects having looser rather than stricter administrative controls. And we'll stop there. So what they're saying basically is that there was an internal audit of MK Ultra. And essentially, it was seen as too permissive in its operation, and that there was too little oversight of the program. The people that ran program MK Ultra were their own bosses, and they answered to themselves, and they approved certain measures, particularly with respect to administering biological agents to people, that required further examination and signatures from the executive level of the CIA in order for them to be legal. So that's essentially what's being said by these auditors, these internal auditors of the CIA, is that the program was poorly managed, but it was probably poorly managed on purpose, because if it was managed phenomenally, then a lot of these programs and projects that were run by the participants in the project or the orchestrators of the project would probably not have been successfully or even close to successfully administered, because they wouldn't have been allowed in the first place. And tighter controls on MK Ultra means less data for research. And the point of MK Ultra was to collect as much data on human behavior as possible, particularly under the administration of biological and chemical agents. So we're basically given a glimpse at how the auditors, the internal auditors of the CIA, saw this program. And because these regulation waivers that are being discussed, all right, these waivers basically allowed permissiveness in sensitive record keeping and data situations that needed a lot more oversight and much better management. Typically, such a waiver could only be asked for if the integrity of the CIA or the integrity of national security was compromised. At that point, certain waivers could be used to authorize the sensitive uses of agents and so forth, chemical and biological, to protect the homeland from a disaster. Now, so far it's been deemed that there is no immediate disaster present or looming. This was a program that was poorly run, poorly documented, and poorly managed. And as a result, constitutional and civil rights infractions occurred. So we're going to start with MK Naomi. MK Naomi, the Fort Detrick CIA project for research and development of chemical and biological agents, provides another example where efforts to protect the security of agency activities overwhelmed administrative protocols. No written records of the transfer of agents such as anthrax or shellfish toxin were kept because of the sensitivity of the area and the desire to keep any possible use of materials like this recordless. I'm going to continue. The result was that the agency had no way of determining what materials were on hand and what could not be certain whether delivery systems such as dart guns or deadly substances such as cobra venom had been issued to the field. So essentially, okay, so MK Naomi is being used as an example for where the security of for agency activities overwhelmed administrative controls, meaning that MK Ultra was found in this audit, or MK Naomi was found in this audit to be one of those programs where waivers of traditional chains of command could be overridden, and that the project orchestrators could make their own decisions as to how to proceed. Otherwise, something like that, where biological weapons are tested and dangerous chemicals like cobra venom, shellfish toxins, and other dangerous materials were being tested by the CIA for potency and used in dart guns, etc. So dart guns coated with cobra venom, dart guns coated with shellfish toxins, dart guns coated with harmful chemical or biological agents. Okay? Very deadly weapons, very covert weapons, very discreet weapons, chemical and biological weapons being tested by the CIA. It was determined that such a project, such a experiment, so as to use, for example, cobra venom on weapons, was seen as a potentially hazardous image adversary, and controls were waived for that. So the CIA was allowed to experiment with such weapons without the typical administrative controls that come from the executive levels of the CIA. So we're going to continue on. So B, authorization. So authorization, this is part B of the section. The destruction of the documents regarding MK Ultra made it difficult to determine what level of the specific projects on the program were authorized. This program is solely a result of the solely a result of the document's destruction. However, even at the height of MK Ultra, the IG noted that, at least with respect to the surreptitious administration of LSD, that the present practice is to maintain no records of planning and approval of test programs. While it is clear that Alan Dulles authorized MK Ultra, the record is unclear as to who authorized specific projects that involved the surreptitious use of LSD to unwitting non-volunteer human subjects. For example, like Dr. Frank Olson. Even given the sensitive and controversial nature of the project, there is no evidence that when John McCone replaced Alan Dulles as the director of Central Intelligence Agency, he was briefed on the details of the project and asked whether it should be continued. Even during the 1963 discussions on the propriety of unwitting testing, the DDP questioned whether it was necessary to brief General Carter, the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, to the Director's alter ego, Apparently this alter ego was kept intact because the CIA officers felt it necessary to keep details of the project restricted to an absolute minimum number of people. In May of 1963, DDP Helms told the Inspector General that the covert testing program was authorized because he had gone to the director, briefed him on it, and the director indicated no disagreement, and therefore the testing will continue. Such authorization, even for non-controversial matters, is clearly less desirable than explicit authorization. In areas such as the surreptitious administration of drugs, it is particularly undesirable. So what we see is we see where the authorization of MK Ultra, and this in contrast to the authorization of specific projects within MK Ultra. For example, the administering of LSD and other chemical or biological agents to unwitting human subjects was examined. And from what it looks like here, the decision to authorize MK Ultra was made in 1953 with the signature of the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Alan Dulles. And the record is not clear as to who authorized specific projects within MK Ultra. Because mind you, MK Ultra was the overarching project, and it had something like 40 sub-projects within it. So at any given time from 1953 to 1973, there were upwards of 40 covert CIA sub-projects working in tandem in society and on people under the MK Ultra banner. You see, these sub-projects had names like MK Naomi, MK Search, MK Chickwit, okay, so many other names for different projects that fell under the CIA's MK Ultra banner. Each had individual and unique, in many cases, authorization controls. And what's being determined now is, okay, we know Director Dulles authorized the MK Ultra conglomerate, but these subunits in MK Ultra, particularly the ones that allow testing on unwitting human subjects, who authorized those? Because these individual projects within MK Ultra needed to be authorized in an itemized fashion. Who did it? What's his name? What's his rank? And why have we not been sent documents with this person's reasoning as to why these kinds of projects ought to be used on human experiments? Give us the sociological reasoning. Give us the scientific reasoning. Give us the political thinking there. Give us the national security logic as to why biochemical agents ought to be used on the American people. Tell us, and tell us right this minute. Okay, the Senate Select Committee has questions about this program. All right, because it sees deficiencies in this program. And what DDP Helms is saying to the Inspector General is this: well, we got broad authorizations. They weren't actual signatures on documents that stated our objectives with testing on humans. We got approval as to the entire scope of it. So we only needed the director's signature for the MK Ultra project. We didn't need a signature from somebody else on each individual project that occurred within the main project. That's our call to make. The only signature we needed was the initial signature, which authorized the 40 sub-projects. So 87, the authorized retention of shellfish toxin by Dr. Nathan Gordon and his subordinates in violation of a presidential directive may have resulted from the failure of the director to issue written instructions to agency officials. The retention was not authorized by senior officials in the agency. The director, Mr. Helms, had instructed Mr. Karamessinis, the deputy director of plans, and Dr. Godalev, the chief of technical services, to relinquish control to the Army of any chemical and biological agents being retained for the FBI at Fort Detrick. So Dr. Godalev passed this instruction to Dr. Gordon. While orders may be disregarded in any operation, one of the reasons that Dr. Gordon used to defend the retention was the fact that he had not received written instructions forbidding it. In some situations, the existence of written instructions did not prevent unauthorized actions. According to an investigation by the CIA's Inspector General, TSD officers had been informed orally that Mr. Helms was to be advised at all times when LSD was to be used. In addition, TSD had received a memo advising staff that LSD was not to be used without the permission of the DDP Frank Wisner. The experiment involving Dr. Olson went ahead without notification of either Mr. Wisner or Mr. Helms. The absence of clear and immediate punishment for that act must undercut the force of other internal instructions and regulations. So I'm going to stop there. So we're talking about some of the chemical weapons that that were retained by some of these CIA-affiliated doctors being a violation of presidential directives. Okay, shellfish toxin can be very dangerous. Okay, and if put on a dart, shellfish toxins can have all kinds of horrible effects on a person if that person is hit with a dart with shellfish toxin on it. Furthermore, there were dangerous chemicals that were transported from the CIA to the Department of the Army for testing without proper administrative permissions. Furthermore, TSD field officers had been informed that Mr. Helms, who was the director at the time, okay, I believe this is 1975 we're talking about here, that anything involving the testing of drugs on people without their knowledge should have gotten express permission of the director Helms and Mr. Wisner as well, who was an assistant to the director. And apparently the deputy director of plans, Frank Wisner, was not advised. Neither was this was 1950. This was 1955. I said 1975 earlier concerning the situation with Dr. Frank Olson. All the dates on this lecture have been correct. However, just 2 seconds ago, I said 1975 with respect to these conversations on authoritative controls, and it was 1955. this collection of memorandums goes back and forward in time. Okay, one second they're talking about 1973. Then on the next section they're talking about 1975. Then on the next section they're talking about 1955. Then on the next section they're talking about 1957. Then in the next section they're talking about 1973 again. Then in the next section they're talking about 1975. So just keep your ears open for the changes in dates here, because these memorandums, the narratives that are used in them, bounce back and forth in time. So keep your ears open. So essentially, what happened to Dr. Frank Olson, with Dr. Godeleb putting LSD in his drink without his knowledge or consent, okay, that matter happened without the director of the CIA, Mr. Helms's permission, and that operation went ahead without the deputy director of plans, Frank Misner's permission. Those were two permissions that were required at that time to administer LSD to unwitting subjects, and they passed over those authorizations and did the experiment on Dr. Olson anyway, and 8 days later, we know what happened to Dr. Olson. So, all right, so operational determinations. These are the words of the Inspector General. Operational determinations are the responsibility of the DDP, and it is he who should advise the DCI in these respects, just as he who is responsible for the results. It is completely unrealistic to consider assigning to the chief medical staff what would in effect be authority over clandestine operations. All right, so I'm going to look at that, but before that, I want to look at the previous paragraph. One last issue must be raised about the authorization procedures in the agency. Chemical agents were used abroad until 1959 for discrediting or disabling operations, and for the use of interrogations with the approval of the Chief of Operations of the DDP. Later, the approval of the Deputy Director of Plans was required for such operations. So after the Dr. Olson situation happened, the CIA made a new policy that required the Deputy Director of Plans and the Chief Operating Officer of the DDP both had to sign off on any chemical agents being administered to unwitting subjects. Okay, that came in the aftermath of poor Dr. Frank Olson. All right, so it's also saying that the medical staff probably should have been involved in the decision to administer LSD. And the project involving the LSD to unwitting non-volunteer human subjects came into question as to whether or not it was done in coordination with the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And that there is doubt by the Senate Select Committee where as to whether or not the head of that organization, the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, knew anything about the administration of LSD to unwitting participants. So we're going to scroll on here. We're going to page 88. In 1963, the Inspector General noted that the head of the BNDD, that's the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, had been briefed about the project, but in the IG, that's the Inspector General's report, did not indicate the level provided to him. Dr. Godeleb testified that I remember meeting Mr. Anslinger and that the general feeling that he was aware. Another CIA officer did not recall any discussion of testing on unwitting subjects when he and Dr. Godeleb met with Commissioner Anslinger. In a memorandum for the record in 1967, Dr. Godeleb stated that Harry Giordano, who replaced Mr. Anslinger, told Dr. Godeleb that when he became commissioner, he was only generally briefed on the arrangement, gave it his general blessing, and said he didn't want to know the details. The same memorandum states, however, that there were several comments which indicated to Dr. Godeleb that Mr. Giordano was aware of the substance of the project. It was possible that the commissioner provided a general authorization for the arrangement without understanding what it entailed or considering its propriety. A reluctance to seek detailed information from the CIA and the CIA's hesitancy to volunteer it has been found in a number of instances during the Select Committee's investigations. This program is not confined to the executive branch, but has marked congressional relationships with the agency. So basically what this paragraph is saying is that the heads or the chief ranking officers of the USA's Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs did not have the full scope of details as to what was going to take place in MK Ultra, because some of MK Ultra's LSD administration was done with the assistance of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And what it looks like is that the orchestrators of MK Ultra got together and found a way to bypass the signatures of top officials in the BNDD, instead get the approval of lower ranking members of the BNDD for their administration of LSD. And they probably paid them too. All right. If they needed access to a prison record, to a local prison or a state or federal prison, and they wanted access to people who had histories of dealing or being hooked on narcotics, they could get records of that information from the BNDD and find out who to choose for test subjects. Okay, the BNDD obviously had people that were in the mid-level management in the operation of the thing, and essentially told the orchestrators of this program, yeah, sure, we'll give you access to all of the drug addicts that we have on file, and you'll know just where to find them. And you can go to the prison that they're being held at, or wherever they're being held at, whatever penitentiary they're being held at, and you can get with the medical staff, and I'll give you a good word for to the medical staff in that prison, and you can go in and administer all the tests on those drug addicts you want to. Spare no expense. Their bodies, their minds, everything is yours now. You take those drug addicts right out of their jail cell, you march them right down into that medical laboratory, and you experiment on them until you can't do it no more. And that's what the BNDD's representatives were saying to the CIA operatives. And what's being examined here in this audit is whether or not either Anslinger or Giordano, who were the heads of the BNDD during this time period, knew anything about it, Now, Dr. Sidney Godaleb tried to imply that Mr. Giordano knew something about it, but I doubt that. I doubt that anybody in the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs knew that some of their requests for access to inmates or persons addicted to drugs that may be incarcerated, that given access to that database to people who come in the name of the CIA is not a huge risk. Okay, they want the names of a bunch of prisoners that were addicted to narcotics. Okay, we'll furnish them that. We don't see any problem with that. But as it turns out, that name list was going to be used by the CIA for targets for human experimentation. We're going to pull from this list of incarcerated drug addicts, the CIA said, and we're going to find a handful of names and what prison they're currently held in, and we're going to test LSD on them. And we're going to see what their reaction to the LSD is as former narcotics users. And if they're cooperative with the experiment as a reward to these incarcerated people, we're going to give them whatever narcotics they want to use recreationally in that jail. If those incarcerated drug users do as we ask them, and they're cooperative every step of the way for the full duration of the experiment, as a prize for their cooperation, we're going to give them any drug they want to use in that prison. If they want heroin, it's yours. If they want cocaine, it's yours. If they want barbiturates, it's yours. If they want opium, it's yours. If they want prescription painkillers, it's yours. If they want PCP, it's yours. If they want opioid substances, it's yours. As a gratitude for participating in this CIA experiment, it's all yours. And it's on the house. And that was the CIA's customer service guarantee to the inmates at those prisons. All right, the CIA went to him and said, "I'm your brother from another mother." All right, the CIA sent representatives into those prisons and said, "I'm your brother from another mother. If you need drugs, you can rely on me. Whether you want some acid or some speed. And if you want narcotics too, the CIA will provide them for you. In the CIA you can trust if you want some angel dust. And if you want some heroin tonight, the CIA will make it all right." And that was the CIA's ironclad satisfaction guarantee. To the inmates of those prisons. And they certainly got a lot of volunteers, to say the least, that were from those prisons. So All right, so we're going to go down to Part C, internal review. The waiver of regulations and the absence of documentation made it difficult to determine who authorized which activities. More importantly, the internal agency reviewed mechanisms much less effective. Controversial and highly sensitive projects, which have been subject to the most rigorous inspection, lacked effective internal review. Given the role of the General Counsel and his reaction to the surreptitious administration of LSD to Dr. Olson, it would have seemed likely that he would have asked about the legality or propriety of any subsequent projects involving such administration. This was not done. He did not learn anything about testing until the 1970s, nor was the General Counsel's opinion sought on other MK Ultra projects. Though these had been characterized by the Inspector General in 1957, reports on TSD as unethical and illicit, there is no mention in the report of the 1957 Inspector General's survey of TSD of the project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD. That project was apparently not brought to the attention of the survey team. The inspector who discovered it during the IG's 1963 survey of TSD recalls coming upon evidence of it inadvertently, rather than it having been called to his attention as an especially sensitive project. So essentially what was being said here was that as a part of this internal review that was being done by the CIA, it seems as though the General Counsel, which is the chief attorney of the CIA, was not properly documented when he was not properly briefed about the plan to sneak LSD into Dr. Olson's liquor bottle. Give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. So, what we have here is an internal review, and essentially what they're saying is the Inspector General, now this is in a 1957 report here, okay, he's saying that the situation with Dr. Olson, so I mean, if you look at all points made from the beginning of these memorandums, or these collective memorandums, the general gist the general idea that you'll see is that the administration of biological or chemical agents to unwitting persons and to willing volunteers alike, there should have been sort of a hierarchical signing off. Okay, what we're seeing is that internal auditors of this particular aspect of MK Ultra believe that the director of the CIA should have signed off on it first. Then the deputy director of plans, then the assistant deputy director of plans, then you need the signature of the head of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. Then you need the signature of the chief medical professional in the CIA. And then you need the signature of the chief attorney of the CIA so that he could review the experiment for legal problems. And if this experiment is free of legal problems, then you give the collection of signatures to the operators of the project. They get with the head of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, and they administer the LSD to these people jointly. And that ensures the integrity of the operation. But instead, you had people getting together, the administrators of MK Ultra, and just making their own rules as they went along. You know, we'll get together with this person or that person, or this prison or that prison, or this hospital or that hospital, and we'll go in there and we'll administer biological and chemical agents to people with no oversight at all. Okay, this is what the CIA's internal auditor gathered was happening. Okay, so going to move on to page 89. The General Counsel and the Inspector General, the principal internal mechanisms for the control possibly improper actions. They were excluded from regular reviews of the project. When the project was discovered, the Executive Director Comptroller voiced strong opposition to it. This is possible that the project would have been terminated in 1957 if it had been called to his attention when he then served as Inspector General. So I'll stop there with just that one paragraph. I mean, we see where the General Counsel and the Inspector General, after having reviewed MK Ultra's auspices, have said it needed regular reviews. Meaning we needed to regularly review the administrative practices of this program. Regular reviews. So that we know it's being run right. So that we know it's being run properly. So that we know it's being run safely. So that we know it's being run according to constitutional guidelines and civil rights appropriations that are afforded to all Americans. We needed to make sure that this program is being run according to CIA policy, you see. So the audit staff, which also serves as an internal review function, also, and we're going to start paraphrasing, they had problems with MK Ultra. When MK Ultra was first proposed, the audit staff was excluded from any part of the program. So the audit staff was essentially kept in the dark as to this new program called Project MK Ultra, and they were not notified at all that this program was about to go into effect. And that's something that they didn't particularly care for. There was a lack of, these internal auditors found that there was a lack of contractual procedures Okay, there was difficulty detecting irregularities because of the lack of solid documentation that the program administrators of MK Ultra were using. The CIA's capacity to verify the accountings provided by outside firms was greatly diminished because of lack of oversight. And we just saw too much lack of oversight. I mean, that's something you're going to keep seeing in this memorandum. Lack of oversight, lack of oversight, lack of oversight. And Project MK Ultra was run autonomously by its administrators with very little oversight from the director, the DDP, the ADDP, the general counsel, the general medical director, the head of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. I mean, there were so many signatures that were skipped over for Project MK Ultra, and the result was you saw what senators and internal auditors alike reported as constitutional rights violations committed by them. So here's what we got. So the audit staff gave an internal review and cited gross administrative failures, bad accounting practices, and so forth. Part D continues compartmentation and jurisdictional conflict within the agency. This is Part D of the document. As has been noted, the testing and use of chemical and biological agents was treated as a highly sensitive activity within the CIA. This resulted in a high degree of compartmentation. At the same time, substantial jurisdictional conflict existed within the agency between the Technical Services Division and the Office of Medical Services and the Office of Security. The compartmentation and jurisdictional conflict may well have led to a duplication of effort within the CIA and to agency policymakers being deprived of useful information. During the 1950s, the Bluebird Committee and then the Artichoke Committee were instituted to bring together representatives of the agency components which had a legislative interest in the ARCA of the alteration to human behavior. By 1957, both these committees had fallen in disuse. No information went to the Technical Services Division about Artichoke operations being conducted by the Office of Security and the Office of Medical Services. The Technical Services Division, TSD, was providing support to the clandestine services in use of chemical and biological agents, but provided little or no information to either the Office of Security or the Office of Medical Services. As one TSD officer involved in these programs testified, although we were acquainted, we certainly didn't share experiences. So we're seeing in Part D, in Section D of this document, we're seeing where in effect, the right hand did not know what the left hand was doing. Okay? That was one of the criticisms of the CIA's MK Ultra project. It was that it was too compartmentalized. There wasn't enough interconnectedness between departments in the administration of this program. Okay, the Technical Services Division, the Office of Security, the Clandestine Services Division, okay, all of these compartments should have been unified and worked together, rather than each compartment having its own separate duties, not allowing the other compartment to know what's going on within it. Intrinsically. Okay? The Office of Medical Services didn't know what the TSD was doing. The TSD didn't know what the medical services department was up to. The Office of Security didn't know what the TSD was doing. The clandestine services department didn't know what anybody was doing. They all had their own unique, very compartmentalized responsibilities with this program. And I think what's being suggested by the auditor here is that you needed less of that and more overarching transparency in the operations that are present in Project MK Ultra. So we're gonna move on to pages 90 and 91. QK Hilltop. Okay, this is another group designed to coordinate research in this area, having very little success. The group met infrequently, only twice a year, and little specific information was exchanged. Concerns over security obviously played some role in the failure to share information, but this appears not to be the only reason. A Technical Services Division officer stated that the Officer of Medical Services simply wasn't particularly interested in what we were doing and never sought such information. On the other hand, a representative of the Office of Medical Services consistently sought to have medical personnel participate in the use of chemical and biological agents, suggested that TSD did not inform the Office of Medical Services in order to prevent their involvement. So what we're seeing here in this first paragraph is that, for example, they're giving reasons. Well, let's just say there are certain actors in this program that are giving excuses to internal auditors as to why there was so little transparency in this program. So, for example, Technical Services said the Office of Medical Service didn't care what we were up to. But the Office of Medical Services is saying that's not necessarily true. We didn't get any information on what the Technical Services Division was up to because the Technical Services Division never came to us or offered us any information. You see? So we have the Technical Services Division saying, so we basically have a disagreement between the Technical Services Division and the Office of Medical Services. And mind you, what's being said by the internal auditors is that when it came to the administering of LSD to unwitting participants in hospital settings or in incarceration settings or in clinical laboratory settings, all of this should have been approved by several outlets first, several higher-ranking outlets, including the TSD, the heads of the TSD, Technical Services Division of the CIA, and the chief of the Medical Services Division of the CIA. Now, what TSD is saying is that Medical Services didn't care what they were up to. And Medical Services is saying, well, TSD never sought our input in the first place to make that judgment. So we have some disagreements with respect to who's liable or who's accountable, rather, for the lack of transparency and the culture of compartmentalization that dominated the CIA in those times. There were jurisdictional conflicts. MK Artichoke, which was a component of MK operations, Involved the operational use of drugs on patients, and the Office of Medical Surgeons wanted some of their physicians to advise and participate in those experiments. In 1957, the Inspector General said that the basic issue is concerned with the extent of authority that should be exercised by the chief of the medical staff over the activities of the TSD, which encroach upon or enter into the medical field. And also we have a situation too where it's saying that it was very unrealistic to consider to assigning to the chief medical staff person authority over clandestine operations. So we're seeing right there in that section of this paragraph is that the chief of medical services saw the administration of biological and chemical agents to patients as entering into the medical field. So for non-medical personnel in the CIA to be administering these drugs to people was probably not the best idea, and the chief of the medical services department wanted its physicians to be a part of the administering of drugs to people so that it could document professionally their findings. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing a little bit of dissension. We're seeing dissension between the offices of the TSD and the offices of the medical services over who should have known what when this testing started. And it goes to show why the internal auditor said there's too much compartmentalization. We need more interconnectedness between the departments of the CIA on projects like this, so that everyone has some idea or some sense of what the next department is up to, of what the next department is doing, of what the next department is working on with respect to Project MKUltra. The Inspector General even said in a paragraph that some of the activities of the chemical division of the FBI are outright illegal. And certainly more oversight would have prevented this. So let's move on to page 91. We're going to start on section C, covert testing on human subjects by groups. Material testing program, EA change, and by Project Derby Hat. EA 729 is the designator or the code used in the Army. Okay, the part of this paragraph is blocked off by a white spot. So I'll read through this paragraph as effectively as possible. EA 1729 is the designator used in the Army for lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. Interest aroused at the Army's chemical warfare lab on the unusual effects of the compound and the emergence of counterintelligence potential envisioned in the use of the LSD drug, and suspected Soviet interest in the drug as a result of the American military. particularly its experiments conducted jointly by the U.S. Army and the Chemical Warfare Laboratories. So I'm going to stop right there in that first paragraph, okay? This paragraph is not condemning the U.S. armed services. This paragraph here is not implying that the U.S. Armed Services, or the Department of Defense as it was called then, had a role in administering LSD to unwitting subjects. Is just simply saying that during this time period, which it's late 1959 now, that the Army took an interest. The U.S. we'll say the executive offices of the Army, okay, the executive heads and the executive directors of the U.S. Army took an interest in chemical agents, including LSD. And the reason the executive directors of the Army took an interest in chemical agents, including LSD, is because it had intelligence that the Soviets were already experimenting with chemical agents, including LSD. So the U.S. Army was curious as to whether or not these biological or chemical agents could be used against the U.S. militarily. Because keep something in mind, at this time in history, the United States and Russia were very skeptical of each other. Okay? World War II had concluded only 12 years prior to this. So we were still fairly fresh off the heels of the conclusion of World War II. And at the conclusion of World War II, a lot of countries, okay, even allies of each other, and mind you, I'm not saying the U.S. and Russia were ever allies. They did have a common enemy in Adolf Hitler, right? And they fought Hitler together as non-allies because it was in both the U.S.'s interest and in the Soviet Russia's interest to dispose of Adolf Hitler and his Third Reich. Okay, and their policies of extermination and expansionism and so forth. Okay, so the U.S., its allies, and Russia all had a military interest in defeating the Third Reich. And even after that war concluded, Russia and the United States still had an adversarial relationship with each other, not so much because of anything that happened specifically after World War II, but because their political ideologies are so different. The U.S. is free market capitalist. Soviet Union was communist. There was a lot of distrust between countries at the conclusion of World War II. Okay, World War II was the most cataclysmic war ever fought by virtue of its death toll, which was in the hundreds of millions worldwide. So, but anyway, the Soviets and the United States were very much rivals. They were rivals in technology. They were rivals in the space race. They were rivals in control over Spanish-speaking countries. They were rivals over so many different things. And one of those rivalries was who is going to be the first country to do extensive experiments on chemical and biological weapons. Is it going to be Russia or the U.S.? Now, I'm sure that there were other countries that experimented with chemical and biological weapons. I'm sure every country on planet Earth At the present time, all of them, all 300 plus countries that are on planet Earth right now, has had experiments done on chemical and biological weapons, controlled experiments on chemical and biological weapons, and sometimes uncontrolled experiments on chemical and biological weapons. So ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, these matters saw quite a bit of scrutiny in these days because there needed to be evaluations of the risks done. And furthermore, I mean, considering that all countries have likely experimented with all kinds of different drugs or biological and chemical weapons and substances, I mean, I'm sure that if there were a biological war that took place, like if you were to, for example, let's say World War III, if it were fought, were a biological war, where all the countries involved used biological and chemical weapons instead of explosives, such a war would be cataclysmic and certainly catastrophic to human life. So because these types of weapons are usable, because these kinds of weapons are makeable, because these kinds of weapons present themselves to private and public entities alike, worldwide, I think that it's a good idea for all countries to have some idea of what these weapons are and what their potential is for harm. Okay, that's what the U.S. Army was doing in the 1950s, and it's still doing it. I mean, I don't think there's a country in the world that does not develop these weapons in case of a catastrophic emergency. I mean, as I often like to say, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, regardless of what country you live in, if you are the head of a country, any country, you're going to have an arsenal of weapons at your disposal that are extremely powerful. And these weapons are for the defense of the homeland and one's allies. If you were to find yourself as the head of any country in a situation where your homeland was threatened and in an apocalyptic scenario, any country would be in their right mind to use any weapon they have at their disposal, including nuclear weapons, including biological weapons, including chemical weapons, to protect your homeland. I mean, there's an old saying, it says all is fair in love and war. And meaning that love, as is the case with war, has a no holds barred and no rules applied designation to them, having been assigned by nature itself. Don't go into a war, ladies and gentlemen, and expect your enemy to fight you fair. Don't expect it. As a matter of fact, you should expect your enemy, any enemy, regardless of the war being fought, regardless of what part of the world it is, you should expect your enemy to fight as dirty and as unfairly as possible. You give your enemy the benefit of the doubt, they can decimate your entire country with tactics that could be considered war crimes or crimes against humanity. Nothing is fair. Okay, the Geneva Conventions have a system of protocols for wartime activity. What's legal and what's not legal in war? How are you going to tell a country what's legal and what's not legal in a war? If the objective of a war is to annihilate your enemy, then in what way should attacks to accomplish that goal be restricted? Okay, so I don't fault the U.S. Army or any army in the world for developing dangerous weapons. It's a part of national security. It's a part of the defense of the homeland. But the way that these weapons and these chemicals are used, okay, with experimentation purposes, I think that there should be oversight. I think there should be guidelines. I think there should be policies. I think there should be protocols and procedures and controls in place, so that the rights and liberties of all people involved are preserved. You see. So, we see where the Inspector General is saying that there are operational needs, and there's a need for a unified collaboration between departments in the CIA, so that these types of operations, these types of programs can be carried out in a way that is conducive to the interest of the entire CIA, rather than conducive to the interest of just one department of the CIA, or 2 departments of the CIA, or 4 departments of the CIA. It would have to be something like that. They're saying that the director of security, the CIA has a director of security. This is not necessarily security like security guards. I mean, I don't think the CIA has security guards. I think the CIA has internal security patrolling the perimeter. I think that the director of security in the CIA is on the intelligence side of things, perhaps the counterintelligence side of things, and determining national threats, that kind of thing. So it says that it is unrealistic to consider assigning to the chief medical staff authority over clandestine operations. It's saying that some of the activities of the chemical division are not only unorthodox, but unethical and sometimes illegal. he's saying that the DDP is in a better position to evaluate the justification for such operations than the chief medical staff. Well, okay, so what he's saying here is this. In this paragraph, the inspector general. Now, I only partly agree with what he just said here. He's saying that getting the chief medical staff too involved in Project Artichoke, or really any of the sub-projects at MK Ultra, would be a mistake, because the Chief Medical Services Office of the CIA does not have the kind of training or the kinds of vocational abilities to handle clandestine operations, and that the DDP, or the Deputy Director of Plans, is in a better situation to evaluate the use of psychochemicals on people under the Artichoke umbrella. But here's the thing about that, though, I disagree with the Inspector General, because what you should probably do is have the chemical division. Okay, you need the chemical division to have some oversight, right? The chemical division was overseeing psychochemicals being issued to people. Okay, under the Artichoke umbrella. Okay, keep in mind that MK Ultra had many sub-projects happening at the same time. One of those sub-projects was called Operation Artichoke, where psychochemicals were being administered to people, and their effects and the psychochemicals' effects on people were being documented in documents by these CIA professionals. And these documents were being shared with the Department of Defense in many respects. Okay, particularly with the Department of Defense's assistance in a number of these matters. So, having looked into this matter quite a bit, I think that the DDP and the chief medical staff should have been involved. I don't think you have to divide responsibility between the DDP and the chief medical staff. The deputy director of plans and the chief medical staff should have broad management authorities over the chemical division in Project Artichoke. That may be all you need. If the principal workings of Project Artichoke is to administer psychoactive chemicals to people, you need the chief medical staff and the DDP collaborating together as managers. Okay, the DDP and the chief medical staff could act as co-managers over the chemical division, and they could oversee in very minute or very intricate details the chemical division's administering of psychoactive chemicals to subjects. And there could be tighter controls on such a thing. I mean, look what happened to Dr. Frank Olson, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Sidney Godalev put LSD in that man's liquor bottle without any permission from the BNDD, the director of the CIA, the assistant deputy director of plans, the chief medical officer, the chief general counsel. Nobody. He didn't get anybody's signature. He just came to the realization, you know what? I want to do an LSD experiment right here at this doctor's convention, right here at this Army doctor's convention. I want to test LSD right here, right now. And he slipped some LSD, 70 micrograms of it, into Dr. Olson's control bottle. And when Dr. Olson went to pour some of that liquor into his glass, he drank it and ingested 70 micrograms of LSD in the process. And it slowly drove that man crazy, and eventually he jumped off of a very, very high building. having pretty much lost all control of his faculties. These kinds of projects must have oversight. Okay, they must. If the chemical division is in charge of the administering of LSD, give it oversight so stuff like that don't happen. All right, we're going to move over to part C here. This is going to be page 91. It's covert testing on human subjects by groups, material testing program, EA Change, and Project Derby had. So I've already gone over this. This was the Soviets and the U.S.'s battle, their war of wills concerning the testing of biological and chemical substances. And essentially, there were seen to be command and control problems by investigators to ensure that these people are being handled with legality. He's saying there was just simply too many permission control problems, too many authorization control problems, too many command problems in the CIA to be running programs like this. And we'll end, ladies and gentlemen, this lecture on the next page. This is a collection of memorandums. This is section 3, MK Naomi. There are a few bullet points here. We'll read through them. MK Naomi was a major CIA program in this area. In 1967, the CIA summarized the process to provide covert support base to meet clandestine operational requirements, to stockpile severely incapacitating and lethal materials, to maintain an operational readiness for special and unique items of dissemination of biological and chemical materials, to provide for the required surveillance, testing, upgrading, and evaluation of materials and items in order to assure absence of defects and complete predictability of results to be expected under operational conditions. Under an agreement reached with the Army in 1952, the Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick was to assist the CIA in developing, testing, and maintaining biological agents and delivery systems. By this agreement, the CIA required the knowledge, skill, and facilities of the Army to develop biological weapons suited for CIA uses. The SOD developed darts coated with biological agents and pills containing several different biological agents. SOD also developed a special gun for firing darts coated with a chemical, which allowed CIA agents to incapacitate a guard dog, enter an installation secretly, and return the dog to consciousness when leaving. SOD scientists develop a new special gun for firing darts coated with a chemical. And biological agents. I'm going to paraphrase this part. The CIA's interest in biological weapons was for use on people and plants and animals. And there were covert attacks being planned against crops. Well, not necessarily being planned, but being discussed and examined. The feasibility of using a biological attack on someone's crops, that type of thing. And MK Naomi was terminated in 1970. On November 25th of 1969, President Nixon renounced any form of the use of biological weapons that kill or incapacitate and ordered the disposal of existing stocks of bacteriological weapons. On February 14th, 1970, the president clarified the extent of his earlier and indicated that toxins, chemicals that are not living organisms but are produced by living organisms were to be destroyed. Although instructed to relinquish control of material held for the CIA by the SOD, the CIA scientists acquired approximately 11 grams of shellfish toxin from an SOD personnel at Fort Detrick, which were stored in a little-used CIA laboratory where it went undetected for 5 years. So what we see here is some general information on MK Naomi, which was a sub-project in MK Ultra. MK Naomi was used to develop biological weapons, particularly homemade biological weapons like dart guns and so forth, tranquilizer guns, that type of thing. And this program was this project was interested in the use of biological weapons against people, plants, and animals as a military mechanism. And, it reiterates my earlier point. You can't stop a government from testing biological weapons, and you can't blame a government for using biological weapons in the field of war. Okay, you can't stop a government from authorizing the testing and the experimentation of chemical weapons, and you can't blame a country for using chemical weapons in the theater of war. Okay, war is no holds barred. Okay, it is a bare knuckle contest between countries. And anything that a country must do to protect the homeland, including the use of biological or chemical weapons, should be explored and should be carried out in the interest of the safety of the homeland and also in the interest of the winning of the conflict. I mean, because if you look at human anthropology over the past 2 million years, there have been wars untold and battles untold and scuffles untold that involve warring factions and army belligerents and so forth in armed combat in the theater of war. And ultimately, the goal is to be the party that walks away from the war with the least amount of casualties and the highest level of satisfaction for its political objectives at the war's conclusion. So you should use whatever weapon helps you to achieve those goals in the theater of war, even if those weapons include biological and chemical weapons. Now, you must understand, ladies and gentlemen, I think that this is both appropriate and necessary, because in the theater of war, I mean, regardless of what country you are, regardless of how many people you have, and regardless of whatever your weapons cache is, regardless of any of that, if you go to war with another country, the fight is for the continuation of your country. The fight is for survival of your race, your people, your country, your allies, your political beliefs. And there are a number of countries that rightfully and lawfully produced chemical and biological weapons. And furthermore, it's the law of nature and indeed the inalienable right of all people around the world to pass on their progeny, to produce progeny, and to further the interests of their people, their country, their civilization. That is an inalienable right. And if the mass production of biological and chemical weapons aids that, then you should produce such weapons. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's Project MK Naomi. It was terminated in 1970. President Nixon strongly disagreed with the use of biological weapons that kill or incapacitate, and he ordered the disposal of existing stocks of bacteriological weapons. He clarified also, President Nixon, on Valentine's Day 1940, that chemicals are not living organisms, but they're produced by living organisms, and they're biological weapons that are subject to his previous direction and need to be destroyed. So President Nixon was totally and completely opposed to Project MK Naomi. Okay, he hated it on its face. He hated the idea of biological weapons being used. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, this is 1970. We're only 24 years removed from the conclusion of the events of World War II, which is considered the most catastrophic of all wars that have been seen on this earth in 2 million years. We're only 23 years removed from that war. It's still, in hindsight, the cataclysm that was posed there. It's still, in hindsight, we still see the immediate effects of it in the U.S. and around the world at this time. President Nixon is saying, no more. We don't need this. We don't want any chemical or biological weapons produced in this country, period. Now keep in mind, this sharply contrasts with the U.S. Department of Defense. The U.S. Department of Defense is of the mindset, and mind you, that the U.S. Department of Defense and President Nixon saw this matter differently. The Department of Defense was saying, well, I think we should develop chemical and biological weapons because we have adversaries overseas that are likely doing it, and we want to stay on par with them militarily at the very least. But President Nixon was saying, I'll hear none of that. We don't want such weapons produced in this country at all. We don't want an atmosphere of war or devastation or weaponry or advanced weaponry or any of the sort to be developed or contrived or conceived here in the United States at all. And we don't want the United States to be a weapons producer of biological or chemical weapons. This was President Richard Nixon talking. So President Richard Nixon and the Department of Defense disagreed on this fundamental topic. The Department of Defense wanted this to continue. Okay. However, President Nixon disagreed. And essentially, shellfish toxin was a hot debate topic in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's a toxin that can have disastrous effects on your skin. And it can actually go undetected for a while in its chemical form. I mean, it doesn't produce any type of a bizarre odor or anything, and it doesn't stand out as anything especially dangerous. But this was something that was also experimented with by the CIA and the Department of Army for its combat uses. So that's going to conclude this part 4 lecture of MK Ultra. This video is running on about the 2-hour mark here. Most of the videos that concern MK Ultra or the Spanish-speaking world or COINTELPRO or any of the lectures that I do that require the use of existing data. These lectures are typically going to run into the 2-hour or 3-hour mark each. So we are about at 2 hours in this lecture. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again next time. Thank you.